Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Randall Stevens. I'm the founder and CEO of Avail. For those of you that are new to Avail, we basically talk about Avail as what we call enterprise content management. I'm going to walk you through what we mean by that. Spend a few minutes with some slides, just kind of giving you an overview of the way that we think about the problem set and how we've gone about solving it with Avail. And then I'm going to give you a live demo of the software and show you just some ins and outs of what you can do with it, what you can expect, how our customers are using it. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to A2K for being our partner in the Australia New Zealand market. It's an important partnership for us. So you'll hear when you hear us talking about Avail, we talk about content. I was talking to somebody recently. You can interchange the word file, data, content, information. It's kind of all the same thing for us. Ultimately, a lot of content is stored in files, and that's really the first, at least, problem that we tackled is how to manage that kind of information. And when we talk about what our kind of mission is with Avail, we're really trying to help our customers and ultimately the end users find, see, and retrieve content, right, or these files wherever those files reside, but to do it through the Avail interface, or what we would say a single pane of glass. So as I describe this problem, and how we're solving it for a lot of customers, hopefully this will start to resonate and make some sense. But I still think of Avail as a relatively new software product. We've actually been around for about 5 years now. The product's been on the ground for about 4. And as you can see from this kind of sampling of some of our customers, we count some of the, I won't say largest, some are large, but they don't have to be big to be customers. And but they are some of the best design engineering firms around the world that have chosen to use Avail to help solve some of these problems inside of their firm. So to kind of back up about and talk for a minute about what problem we kind of set out to solve. If you look, all files are stored in a file system, whether that's on-prem or in the cloud. Files, we're all used to, file folders or some semblance of hierarchical file folders with files being stored in those folders. And that's basically been the way we've all operated for really the last 40 years with the advent of personal computers and file systems and the way that we're going to store and retrieve all this information. So when we set out looking at this problem, what we realized is that, and hopefully all of you all can agree with, and that is that file systems don't fail because they're a bad place to store information, but we all have a lot of trouble when it comes to what it means to retrieve information from these file systems, especially at scale when you have a lot of content or a lot of information. So we all know the frustrations of trying to use Windows File Explorer and looking for information, trying to get to it, trying to find a specific file, wading through hundreds, thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands or millions of files potentially that you to try to find a needle in a haystack. So we kind of went at, as we started developing Avail and thinking about the problem, that we didn't want to, we didn't need to concentrate on where the files were stored. That all works pretty well. It's pretty simple. Files have to be stored somewhere, again, on-prem or in a cloud location. What we've really concentrated on with Avail was the retrieval side and picking apart the frailties of the file system and what has made that such a frustrating experience, and developed Avail to be able to respond to those challenges. So we are 100% focused in the AEC market. And the other kind of big thing that we did when we began developing Avail was decided that if we really wanted to solve content, the content management problem, Avail needed to be a single source of being able to handle any and all content that was being managed. I'll show you a slide here in a minute. It's not unusual for there to be a lot of different applications in use. So we talk about Avail being truly content agnostic. And by that, we mean, this isn't meant for you all to read, but this is one of our clients, all of the different kinds of applications that are at use inside of their workflow. And we use this as just both a reminder to ourselves, but also to communicate that, when you step back, the world isn't just Revit. There's a lot of different kinds of applications and a lot of different kinds of files being produced and a lot of different information that's involved in the practice in the AEC industry. So our goal was to be able to handle any and all of this information, and we can and do. And we've seen over 1,000 different file formats being managed inside of Avail by our customers. So when we say that we're content agnostic, we mean not only the file type that we're agnostic to that you can manage inside of Avail, but becoming more and more important, also where that content is being stored. So Avail from day one, a lot of our customers 4 and 5 years ago had a lot of on-prem, and a lot still continue to have their own private networks inside the firewall where that data was being stored. But more and more, we all know that there's been a lot more movement of data moving into the cloud. Our premise is that that's going to continue to expand. You're going to have content in a lot of different places. I like to say for a lot of very good reasons. Our goal is to support that, not fight it. So Avail is not only agnostic to the kind of content, but where hopefully you've chosen to store that content. Our goal is to support that. And I'll show you some examples. So you can see on this slide, right? Agnostic not only to what you need to manage, but ultimately maybe the most important thing nowadays is where you want to store that or where that information needs to be. What this all sums up to, right, from thinking about the end user, getting to all this kind of information across all the different applications, it means one, there's fewer apps for you to manage if you're in charge of deploying, and more importantly, for the end users, there's fewer applications that they have to learn. And that's an important piece. If you're only intermittently using some different applications, it's a very frustrating experience to learn. Try to come basically every time you go back to use it, you're trying to relearn it. Interfaces are all different across different kinds of content management interfaces from application to application. So our goal, was to make that a single source where all of the information can come through Avail. And ultimately, you'll hear us talking about making this future-proof. You're going to be using one application today, but who knows what applications you're going to be using tomorrow. The good news is that Avail is designed to be able to handle those. We do some deep dives. I'm going to show you some very specific stuff we do around Revit, but in general, it's a very future-proof kind of application as you begin to make these choices about the platform that you're going to use to manage this. So let me I'm going to now kind of get a little bit into the weeds about how we've designed, or the way that we've thought about designing this and the way that we've gone about it. And then, as I said, I'm going to give you a live demo and show you the software in action so that you're not just looking at these slides. But when you think about the files, this little diagram to the left, bottom left, file systems, we're all used to this kind of concept of a hierarchical folder system, and then ultimately little files that are stored in those folders, sometimes dozens, sometimes thousands of files that end up in these file structures. If you think about that, each one of those files, the file format, be it a Revit file or a PDF document, those files are also just little containers of information, little file systems themselves with information. Revit's a good example. If you look to the right, we also think about the data that's inside the file in the very same manner with Avail. You'll hear us talking about, when you're using Avail, that we virtualize content. I'm going to show you some very specific things we do around Revit in a few minutes, but we basically try to virtualize this information away from the file system. And this is how we go about giving you new interfaces to this information and data. So the first thing that we do, those files, we do what's called indexing. So We'll crawl that data at your choosing that's on your file system. We pick up a lot of information, and then we basically provide new tools on the front end and new paradigms for thinking about getting to that information the way it's organized. So the first is, you'll see when I give you the demo, we have a metaphor of what we call channels. You can think about those as libraries, but they're basically ways of kind of organizing content that you want into an organizational bucket. We just happen to call them channels. And more importantly, you can think about that as it's a way of adding context to this information. So you could have a bunch of different files that could be in different locations and even in different places, some in the cloud and some on-prem. You can actually mix that kind of info together in Avail, and it basically presents that information to the user in a new context of your choosing by the way you've chosen to organize what we call channels. This is moving forward a little bit, but we're working on some new things around project data. We're working on what we call workspaces and ultimately archival data. So there's just a lot of info and data that probably sits in your organization. We use these metaphors as ways to logically break that information up, and it ultimately makes searching and finding that information much easier. And then ultimately, there's a bunch of tools that end up in the interfaces of our software. Things like being able to tag, search, filter things, flag them. We think about these as just parts of a workflow, looking for things, finding it, driving kind of workflows around these kind of content-driven workflows. So this is a basic way to think about the architecture of what we're doing. I'm going to be showing you, obviously, our latest version of Avail. We're actually working on the 5th generation, Avail 5.0, which will probably come around sometime next summer. But with this version that I'm going to show you, there was a real focus on search and simplifying what it meant to search for information and data. And as I'll show you, a real emphasis on the visuals. This is just a screenshot of what I'll show you live here in a minute, but this is the idea that your channels of information in Avail are just kind of logical. Think of them as logical buckets. If I'm organizing my Rhino assets, I'm going to have a Rhino channel. It probably makes sense. If I'm working in SketchUp, I'm probably going to have a channel with SketchUp content, and I know which channel to go into for certain kinds of information. But Avail's really up to you. When you open it up, it's a blank slate. You can decide what makes sense for your own organization, how you want to organize your information. And then, as you drill into a channel, this is, again, just a screen grab, but inside of like a Revit content channel here, I'm showing, details. And to the right, what you're seeing is what we call our preview panel. We have a huge emphasis on Avail around the visual aspect of the content in this industry. A lot of this content is very visual in nature. People, the designers and the engineers that are working with this data want and need to see it. And we really have an appreciation for that. And you'll see in the interface of what we do, when we talk about search, it's partially typing in or filtering what you're looking for, but it's also very visual in your ability to be able to see this information, high resolution, and decide before you've opened that up in a technical application if this is indeed the information that you're looking for. I'm gonna talk just for a second, a little bit of a dive around what we've done with Revit, and then I'm going to give you a demo and walk through those parts of it and show you how this works. But we released earlier this year a feature called Harvest, and what Harvest is it's specific to Revit at this point. And what we did was we began to tackle some very specific problems around Revit, particularly around I like to say families are one thing. Families are relatively easy to manage from the standpoint of a family is an individual file. It's a .rfa file if you're a Revit user. But there's a lot of information and data that's needed to be managed around Revit that's not a family. So groups, schedules, legends, sheets, drafting views, system families, there's all of these kind of content types that aren't families, and they're very cumbersome and difficult to manage around Revit and the workflows around that. So this Harvest initiative focused on that. We do what we're calling element level virtualization of this kind of content. I'll show you what we mean by that in a second, but it allows you to have what we call container files, or those RVT files where you're continuing to manage that kind of info. But it lets you present that to the end users as individual items. So they can basically treat everything that you're wanting to push out from a Revit standpoint gets treated the same. Basically drag and drop, find it, drag and drop it into your current project. We also, I didn't explain, we have desktop software that I'm going to show you. We also have browsers that run inside of applications. We have a browser that runs inside of Revit, but we also have that for AutoCAD, Civil 3D, any AutoCAD based product that you might be using. We have those browsers for Rhino and SketchUp and 3ds Max. We're about to release a new browser for MicroStation. So we have these kind of point consumption points that you can use inside of these applications. And we did an update this past year on the browser version, lets you do things like bulk loading content, real focus on simplification as we did for all of this. And then ultimately this Harvest 2.0, it supports all of the tag information that you can pull out of that. It reports into our analytics. I'll show you in a minute. There's a lot of deep reporting and analytics data that's available in all of this as well. So when I talk about Revit element virtualization, let me just kind of show you a couple of things about what I mean by that. So again, families are one thing, but when it comes to managing and using drafting views and groups, legends, sheets, schedules, system families, that's a whole nother manner. So what Avail does through this Harvest component is utility is we basically run a pre-process on those container libraries. And it basically allows your in Avail through Avail for your end users to see any and all of that information as individual items. That means they can be searched individually, tagged and found in easily through the Avail interface. But on the back end, that data is still coming out of that single RVT source. So it lets you manage it that way. We do have a way that you can break that apart into Harvest manages breaking that out into individual source files, which I won't dive into it. We do some webinars specifically on this, but it lets us do some hosting cloud and different ways to manage that data. The benefit, right, of this is that, you know, I like to say this is the having your cake and eating it too. It really means that from a management standpoint of this kind of Revit content data, you can decide to manage this in these container libraries, one or multiple if you're choosing, and how you want to break that up. And on the end user side, it's the real simplification and ease of now finding and using that kind of information. And I'm going to give you a live demo of that here in a second. So ultimately, it allows your users to just drag and drop any of these right into their project without having to worry about it. So with that, I'm going to take a sip of water and I'm going to move over here. I'm going to pop Avail up, what we call the Avail desktop, and give you a live demo. We should have some time at the end of this for questions. So, feel free to start peppering behind the scenes with my colleagues that are, and we'll try to do some Q&A around this as well, answer any of your questions. But so what you're seeing on the screen, I always start with this kind of minimize so you'll understand. This is what we call the Avail desktop app. It's a desktop application that gets installed on each user's machine. You can basically think about this as replacing Windows File Explorer as your main way to get to information. I tend to be, if you saw me talking, I'm a kind of person that talks with my hands. And when I'm not doing that, I'm talking with my mouse. So I'm usually moving this kind of stuff around. I'm just doing this with my scroll wheel to change the scale of these, what we call channel cards. But what you're seeing, these are the channels that we have created to hold certain kinds of information. And all I have to do is double click on one of these to drill into that channel to see information. So in this case, I have a Revit channel with lots of Revit content in it. If I look down in the bottom left, I have over 3,300 pieces of content that are sitting into this channel. I'm just scrolling to show you, the visual aspect of this. If I hold my scroll wheel down, I can increase the size of those thumbnails. And I can also do things like open up that preview panel up here at the top right and see high resolution previews of things. I'll show you what that looks like with things like drafting views here in a minute. The important thing to understand here is if I close this and go to this piece of content, I can right click and say, open the location of that. And on my other screen, I'll bring it over here. What you're seeing is that these files actually just live in a file system somewhere, right, down in a folder structure. So I like to show this because what you need to understand is that Avail didn't move that content around. Avail's just pointing to it, and this is what lets Avail be agnostic to where that content is stored. It can be in lots of different places. So at this point, I'll just show you a couple of things. Within a channel, I have what we call the filters panel down here below, which has a lot of the tags that are associated with it. We store tags in what we call key value pairs of data, much like a parameter would be inside of a Revit file. In fact, you can see we pick up things like what's the Revit category. So if I wanted to click on casework, by clicking on that, what you're seeing is that Avail will now basically search and filter out all that information, but it also drops this down and says, well, I just want to find the wall cabinets that are that casework. If I cleared that search, I could also, type, if I wanted to just type cabinet, I could type that into the search bar at the top of this channel, and I can see now a lot of things that match cabinet. And this might be across different kinds of Revit categories, right? I have lighting fixtures that must have some cabinets. It's under cabinet, it was in the name of that file. But I can use any combination of text and what we call tag search in order to drill down and find this information. If I go back to my home screen, what we call home, across all of these different kinds of channels, I might now type in cabinet, and I'm now searching across all of these channels for the word cabinet. And I'll see content, but we also bring back, you'll notice across the top, we also bring back and tell you what kind of channels we found these results in. So I can say, well, here's some SketchUp cabinets. So in one click, I'm looking at SketchUp content. Here was the Revit content. But I've also got, here's URLs. When I talk about Avail being content agnostic, you can even index URLs. And if I open up my preview panel, I'm actually looking at a live rendered website for stainless steel, right? Cabinets, floors, right? So the search picked up on that. So that's just an example of how broad when we talk about being content agnostic. If I were to look for something like a PDF file, I can look across, find PDF documents inside of these different channels. And again, if I open up my preview panel, Avail supports rendering of that PDF data right inside of Avail's interface without having to open up an external PDF viewer in order to see that. So again, we're not trying to replace different kinds of software that you're using for those things. Our goal is help you as quickly as possible, put your hands on the info and data, do it in a visual manner, and then let you preview that before you decide to open that up or use it inside of one of your technical applications that you have in use. So our customers tend to use Avail kind of in I'll say three broad categories. There's more, but they usually start with their technical content. It's going to be something like Revit content or Rhino or some of their kind of reusable libraries of technical assets, SketchUp. They'll tend to then move into visualization assets. Again, SketchUp, maybe 3ds Max files, could be material libraries, things like their V-Ray rendering material libraries like this that they might be using it to organize and manage and access through. And then the third, I'll go ahead and say four. Third would be photos. We tend to see a lot of photo libraries more and more being managed and accessed and used inside of Avail. Here you can see I've got a precedent library where I've got lots of images and photos. Again, take full advantage of these kind of preview capabilities that you can use to be able to see this kind of information. And then what I'll say, if I was going to add a fourth, things like marketing departments, PowerPoint files, PDF documents, any of these kinds of things that you might be using inside of the firm that could be managed inside of Avail. So I think what I hope is that most of our customers, and we're beginning to see the adoption across different like I said, the multitude of different kinds of content being managed in it. I think the most important thing that you should leave understanding about Avail from this webinar is you may go into it with one very specific use case in mind that justifies using it. But keep in mind that you can actually get a lot of value out of managing a lot of different kinds of info and content. And if you're a large organization, this becomes very important that once you've made the investment, Avail lets you manage any and all of these kinds of different assets that you're probably trying to organize and use inside of your firm. So I'm going to pop Revit next to this and just kind of show you. And I'm going to concentrate on this harvest and what we've done around virtualizing, any and all of this kind of Revit kinds of content. So this is a channel where I've taken really just two different RVT files. We call them container libraries, but I've heard customers call them warehouse files. Basically think of them as your template files that you've got with lots of different kinds of information, standardized information that you need to serve out. And what you're seeing here is that, I can now break out and say, I can have drafting views. So I can have drafting view libraries that are broken out like this. If I click on one of these and open that preview panel, you'll see that these are high enough resolution that you can preview those. Again, you can do all of this without having to even have Revit on your desktop installed, and you can see all of this information. But it's very quick and easy for people to do then searches. So if I knew I was looking for a jam detail, I can do a jam detail search. I can preview these, see if that's the detail that I want to use. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dock this next to Revit and just show you how this works. So what I'm going to do is close that preview panel. This is a little bit, usually somebody's got, Avail running on one monitor with their Revit model on the other. So what you're seeing here, this is actually our browser. If I were to close my desktop app, this browser can be used standalone, but I'm actually going to do the opposite. I'm actually just going to close that browser and concentrate on the Revit project file and show you that you can, if I were to now go in, let's go in and view. Sorry, I turned off my project browser when I did that. So if I were to go in and say, just create a new sheet inside of my project, let's just create a new sheet. What I can do is I can go over here to Avail where I have these drafting views, and I did my search and I find one of these drafting views, and I can actually just drag and drop that over onto my Revit project. And what you're going to see is that Avail is pulling that drafting view from the source, external container file, loading it, and in one step putting me in placement mode to drop that onto a sheet. So it's that easy to do that. And if I were to do that with something like a legend or a schedule, let's do a schedule. So I could come in here and say, yeah, I'm looking for a door schedule. Here are my standard door schedules. And I'm just going to drag that door schedule onto this current sheet. And what you're going to see is that that schedule is going to be loaded into the project. It's obviously going to reference the door information inside of my project, and it's going to let me drag and drop that, right onto a sheet. So it's basically populating that standardized door schedule inside of my current project. So 3D view inside of this project. If I were to do something like a system family, we all fight things like system wall types or other kinds of system families that you're trying to organize. Again, it is all searchable. You can find those kinds of assets, and then once you've done that, it's as easy as dragging that over to my current project, and I can begin modeling directly inside of my project with that system wall type. So we think we took a major step forward in what it means to to standardize the management of all of these kinds of assets, as well as, probably more importantly, the ease of which your end users can now find that information and get it into their project. And that was a big goal of ours. I can do the same. I won't load one of these sheets, but I can literally just drag and drop and load an entire sheet a standardized sheet into the project as well. We do that with groups. If I wanted to bring a group in, I could, search and find that. We've got a lot of customers that are doing things like that. So it makes it just that easy to think about what it means to bring this kind of information out of a standardized library and into your current project. So I'll pat our team on the back here that we spent a lot of time and effort really, first of all, understanding the problem and then working on what it meant to really simplify the management and ultimately delivery of this information and how easy it is for your end users to be able to use this inside of their projects. So I'm going to go, let me go back to my slides just for a second, and I'll kind of wrap this part of it up, and we can spend as much time as you all want doing some Q&A. But behind everything that I did in Avail is deep analytics and data. So everything that I was doing is flowing through in analytics. These are some sample, I'm clear to say sample dashboards that we provide, but the way that we provide, we basically provide you with all the raw data. If you're using Power BI or Tableau, or we use Google Data Studio a lot internally to do these kinds of things, but it gives you a lot of deep understanding about what your users are actually doing with this information. It gives you a lot of deep information on what they're actually searching for. It'll probably, once our customers start using Avail, it's probably the first time that they've ever had an understanding across their organization about what people at their desk are actually looking for. One of the more popular pieces of information is down here in the bottom right. What are people searching for that's returning 0 results? In your organization, you've probably never known, unless it's a squeaky wheel, what somebody was looking for that they couldn't even find in your operation, in your network. But Avail lets you start to see that kind of information. So I'll take another drink of water, and let's see if we had any Q&A that we can answer some questions. It looks like one of the questions was whether there was going to be a recording of this. Dexter, I see that you're recording. Is this something that's going to be shared out with everyone?
Yep, so it's going to get uploaded on a YouTube channel on Monday.
All right. Any other questions? Put them in the Q&A, or somebody, we're probably monitoring chat as well. We can monitor that. I'm just going to, while I'm waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I'm going to kind of go back over here and see if there's anything specific that I can that jogs my memory that I may have missed. But again, the use of this is really, really simple. Basically, if you can drag and drop a file type onto an application, you can drag and drop it right out of Avail. So I can drag and drop images or PSD files into Photoshop. I could drag image files into PowerPoint or Microsoft Word. I can drop images onto a sheet inside of Revit. And that's all just a function of that Revit knows how to handle, right, that kind of a file type. So it looks like a few of you are starting to pop some questions in. Let me take a quick look. Does it work with Revit LT? So yes and no. Here's the problem. Revit LT does not accept add-ins or plugins. So there's certain things that we're doing around Revit that has to be our plugin that we wrote that knows how to do things like everything I showed you that we were doing with that harvested information requires a plugin, and you can't do that in Revit LT. What I'm not 100% positive, but I think as long as you can drag and drop like an RFA file, a family file, into Revit LT from Windows File Explorer, you can drag and drop it out of Avail's desktop. So that's one kind of way to think about Avail. If you can drag and drop it from Windows File Explorer and it works in an application, you're going to be able to do that very same thing in Avail Desktop. But when we've done very special deep dive stuff, like what I showed you with Harvest and the way that we're pulling data with those RVT files and bringing it into Revit, you cannot do that with LT without having full-blown Revit. Next question was, does it search my system and keep it in Avail? I'm going to kind of read into what you're asking. So basically, the only thing that ends up in Avail is what you desire to put in Avail. So you're in complete control of deciding what is put into Avail. What I didn't show you was that when you create a channel, let me just use like my Revit, live channel here. Avail is what we call a kind of command and control. So when somebody creates a channel and puts information into it, they're the only people on the planet that sees that. What you then do is decide who you're going to share that out with. So you can decide, you can see here that I shared that out with everyone. So I said, let everyone in my company basically view that. But I could also, if I wanted to, my colleague, Todd Trivasano, that's on our team, I could say, oh, I'm going to share this out with Todd. And I'm actually going to elevate him to have editing privileges on this channel so he can help me curate it. So you've got a lot of control, not only controlling what information is in Avail, what you're basically deciding what to put in there, but then you're deciding also who gets to see that. And you can do that on a per channel basis. So every one of these channels can be shared out with different groups of people that on a kind of need to see basis, or, The other thing, though, that I'll say, there's a piece of Avail that we call Stream. Stream is designed to automate what it means to, I don't have Stream set up in this demo account, but basically you can point Stream to a server, and it, based on a set of rules, Stream will automatically keep information that shows up on your file system, will keep it synchronized and showing up in Avail. So that's a very popular feature as well. You can basically have parts of your network where you're storing standardized information. You set a rule up with Stream and say, I want anything that's a PDF over here to show up in this channel of Avail, and Avail Stream will keep that synchronized. So it's a little bit of both, Nigel, that asked that question. And then what channel on Monday? I'm not sure what that means. I'll move on to the next one. And then when you've dragged the door list in, it added a new schedule in Revit. What happens with Avail if you go into the schedule in Revit and start changing information? Some projects have very specific project items that require custom items. Would it change the library? So the answer is no. Whenever you're bringing something in from Avail into your Revit project, it's no different than if you had brought that in through Revit project standards transfer, or you did a drag and drop of that file. Let's say it was a family from a file system into that. That becomes part of that project, and it's not affecting the source. If you opened the source and had write privileges back to that, let's just say it was a family, and you opened up, you are sourcing from the primary file, but most everybody at that point is a read only, and they're consuming it and bringing it into their project. If you had write privileges back to that part of the network, and you opened, say, that family up in the family editor and made changes to it and hit save, if you're a BIM manager and that's your job, that's what you want. You want to be able to write that data back to the original source location, and then basically everybody is seeing the latest version of that. But in general, no, it's we're not changing the permission structure of the underlying file system. So you're not accidentally writing over top of that kind of information. Before I forget it, we didn't get into, I'll actually click over here and show you what I mean by this, but you can store your own information in file locations. I use this as an example. Here are files in a channel that live in a lot of different file systems: OneDrive, SharePoint, Box, Google Drive, my own network, Dropbox, BIM 360. But we also have our own host, what we call host in cloud option. So what I'm going to show you here is that I can decide to host files in a centralized cloud location. In this example, Avail's cloud location as the host. And that means that when the users are using this, they're having to download that file to use it. So we've got a lot of different options about where and how. We do a lot of, I'll say, consulting almost with our customers on the front end to help understand what their needs are and where that data should live or needs to live. But you have a lot of different options with Avail, not just one size fits all. The follow-up question was, does that mean you can drag and drop a detail item, but not a system family in Revit LT? I'm going to say it means, well, yes, that detail item is as long as it's a standalone family. Again, the test with LT is, forget about Avail. If you can drag and drop it from Windows File Explorer, the same thing is going to work in Avail. And the same things that you can't do are also not going to work with Avail because it requires us to have a plugin, right? So when you talk about things like that system family, everything that has to come out of an RVT file means that we had to use our plugin to be the intermediary, plucking it out of the source RVT and getting it into the current project. So everything that requires it to be stored in an RVT file format is not going to work in LT. Everything that can be stored as an RFA will work, should work by just dragging and drop it out of Avail's interface. There's a free version. You can download a free version of Avail. We just limit your number of channels and how much content you can put in it, but you can go test this kind of out for yourself and kind of get a feel for how it works. So feel free to go download it, create a channel, put some of this kind of content in there, and you'll just see very quickly how it works. Those are good questions. So I think we're caught up on that front. We can see if there's any others before we try to wrap.
This is Will. If you want to jump into the chat, there's a fair bit going on in there too.
All right, I'll do it. I like questions. Do system families bring materials with them? The answer is, the answer is it brings the material definition, but if that material was like referencing a JPEG, say, texture that went with it as part of the render appearance, the answer to that is no. It's not going to move that into a location that's accessible. What you hopefully are doing though is designing where your information is stored so that is a central location, so that when a user does bring that family into their Revit project, they're able to reference to a centralized place where that, say, material definition is being referenced as well. So that's a bit of a nuanced answer to that, but we're not moving anything that's referenced by that material definition through Avail right now. So hi all, this will be up. Oh, I see what now I understand what the Monday reference was. Yes, this A2K is going to get this up into their YouTube channel on Monday. So you'll have access to it. Next question, is there a way users can report issues with Revit content through Avail? Great question. The answer to that is yes. We have what we call flags and comments. So we approach this from what we refer to as break fix. So basically, if a user's in a channel and they've incurred a problem, they can actually right click and flag a piece of content as needing attention. And it basically forces them to tell you what's wrong with it. The worst thing that could happen was for them to flag it and not tell you what's wrong with it. So we basically force them through this needs attention to say, this is missing shared parameters. That is a flag then that gets added. And then from a manager standpoint, you can basically filter out in this channel and say, show me everything that needs attention. And then if you open up the comments section, you'll be able to see, I've misspelled that, but you'll be able to see what they told you was wrong with it. So yes, the answer is we're actually working on some new features. We're actually working on I'm going to show you here in a second a couple things that we're working on, but we're working on a plugin architecture for Avail. Some of the plugins that we're working on are things like Kanban kind of processes around driving QA/QC processes around content. and uploading, taking file uploads and helping to manage that. So there's some other good things on the way that we're working on right now. The question, follow-on question to that was, how does Avail work with Revit families that have type catalogs? And does that workflow work with Revit LT? So the answer is yes, we support file type catalogs. In fact, you don't see those file type catalogs here, but if I were to open up Revit again, what I'll show you, oh, sorry, let me get Revit opened up just so that you'll understand this. So if I go back and open now my, let me get my Avail browser open back up. So what you're seeing here are the different types, but if I were to look at things like doors, I think a lot of my doors in here have external type catalogs. So I'm just going to select one of these. What you'll see is that Avail will actually recognize here. You can see that there was one internal type, but here are external types that came with the type catalog. And again, if I wanted to select one of those, I could just drag and drop into my current project and load this kind of a door into my current project. I should be able to see what's going on here. Load that. I've got something wrong with my oh, I was in placement mode. That's my problem. But yes, the answer is I can, you can see here, I can drag and drop a single type. I didn't get into the details, but one of the huge benefits of working like this is we call it a very additive process for bringing data into your projects. You're not bulk loading through your template or bulk loading a lot of data that ends up not wanting to be in your project up front. It's a very kind of additive approach to be able to bring this data into your project. So about LT, LT's, the problem is you can't have this plugin where you can see. We're going to be working, I'm just going to say no. LT is a problem. Until they let you have plugins in LT, you're not going to be able to do a lot of the kinds of things that we're doing that I'm showing you inside of Revit. With the new version of Avail, how does the export to Excel work? Great question. So let me go back to full screen here and show you, and I always use the materials to demonstrate this, but the first plugin said that we were working on a plugin architecture. I'm going to show you what we mean by that. So our first plugin was what we call a tag IO. So you can see this channel, I have a lot of metadata, these tags that are down here. Tag IO lets you export. I'm going to export this info into a spreadsheet and save it into an external and open it up in Excel. And this first plugin that we wrote lets you manage this kind of data inside of Excel. So you can see here, I'm able to export that quickly, this info. And I can do things like, if I wanted to get rid of or add or append to color, I could come in here. I'm looking at the file names now and say, let's go down through here and put brown as the color. So I'm just adding data through a spreadsheet into this. And if I just save that and go back over here and say, I'm going to upload that same data sheet, what you'll see is that we're now find what changed. And we can basically now add, and you'll see this update as soon as that finishes, you'll see the color brown show up. And it was that easy for me to use a spreadsheet to, QA, QC, or add that kind of info. So you can do that with any of these channels of data. It's a great new addition for, we've got a lot of our customers starting to use that. And it's just a great way to both QA, QC your info and to manage those kinds of, you can add your own keys and add that data through an Excel spreadsheet. So it's a really cool feature. And then the last question I have here in chat was, is there versioning of Revit families that if something was overridden that shouldn't be, that if something's overwritten, that we can revert back to the previous version? So the answer to that is, I'm going to say no. If you opened up, if you have a Revit 2020 family and you're a BIM manager that has right access to that family, and you open that family up and in the family editor and in 2021 and hit save, it's going to write back over top of that RFA as a 2021, upgraded version. So this gets into the particulars of that we are not in control of where you want to store your content. And it's a big, it's a big thing that you have to understand and think through when you start thinking about what we're doing and maybe more importantly, not doing. What Avail does do is, if I'm in 2020 and my content's 2020, but I opened up Revit 2021, Avail, Revit, we'll upgrade that so that it can be brought into the current, so we're not doing any magic, on that front. You can bring that content forward in one of your new applications. I think if I dig into your question, you're looking for like what would be considered version control. Like basically, if you somehow, if you upload it into our host in cloud and we're possessing your 2020 in our cloud hosted location, and you tried to upload you uploaded a new version that was 2021 over top of it, do we give you the ability to roll back or revert back to the 2020 version that you just now overwrote? The answer to that right now is no. Are we sitting in a position where we could start doing some of that? The answer is yes. But for most of our customers, that hasn't been a big issue. Once you start to understand where the data is being stored and what you're doing with it, it really comes down to right permissions. And most of the end users don't have right permissions. So you don't have that problem of writing over top of things. So hopefully that answered that question. Good question though. Let's see if any others came in. Doesn't look like anything else came in. While we see if any other questions came in, I'm going to go back over to my slides. Just one other quick thing to show you. I'm always working on the next gen of stuff, so tend to be thinking about that. But we're actually working on some mobile access to all this. This is actually a screen grab from my iPad where I was logged in and I could actually see the same information on an iPad. The new release that we just released, a point release 4.2.1. There is sharing, link sharing, and that's a big part of mobile. The ability to see something on your phone, like the detail library would be a good example. Click and share a link through, say, your Teams or Slack to somebody, and at their desk, they're able to actually pull up that technical detail in Revit. So there's some really cool stuff on that front that we're rolling in as part of the kind of overall roadmap and direction that we're going in. So we haven't released out any of the mobile, but I'm actually running this on my phone, and that'll support both Android and iOS. But those are some of the things that we're working on kind of moving forward. Any other questions that I can answer for anybody?